Thank you. It's good to be here. It isn't easy to get to Reno from Washington. So I got here at midnight last night, which was about 3 my time. So if I look a little bleary-eyed, it's because I came in late. Sometimes on radio and television, people will ask me, and sometimes they're like, "Who are you supporting?" As if they don't know who I'm supporting for president. And so usually I respond by saying, I kind of like that Ron Paul guy. I just sent my first son off to college, and when you send your kids off to college, you think, well, what career will they choose? Will they be successful? Will they do a good job? And there's the story of the husband and wife that were worried about their son going off to college, and so they devised a test to see how he would do. They put out some money on the table. They figured if he picked up the money, he might be a businessman. They put out the Bible, and they figured out if he picked up the Bible, he might become a clergyman. And they put out a fifth of whiskey, and they figured if he took the whiskey, he might just be a drunk. So they hid in the closet, and they watched, and the son came in, picked up $20, held it up to the light, stuck it in his pocket. He picked up the Bible, flipped through it, stuck it under his arm, picked up the fifth of whiskey, took the cork out, took a swig, and stuck it under his arm and headed off to his room. And the father said to his wife, "It's worse than we thought. He's going to be a politician." Now, I don't know how politicians got to be the butt of so many jokes, but most of the time I would say it's probably deserved. They say that Congress has about a 15% approval rating. And yet, about 96% of incumbents win re-election. So somehow there's a paradox there. People hate Congress in general, but seem to like their congressman. Some of that may be an argument for term limits, because what happens is incumbents just keep winning and winning because there are so many things in their favor. The newspaper writes about them, you go to Rotary, you go everywhere all the time as an incumbent. And I always notice this when I belong to my Lions Club. Challengers never come, but somehow incumbents are allowed to come to speak. It's just an unfair advantage that incumbents have, so we keep electing the same old people. But I've been a believer in term limits for many years. I think there's a paradox also in the sense that people want us to act. They say, well, Congress is no good, they're doing nothing, we just want them to act. But they really don't want us just to act. I think they want us to act in a principled way. They elect you because what you say you stand for. So I think people do want action, but they don't want any old action. The media sometimes mistakes this and says, well, Congress needs to just get together. It's like we need to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and everything will be okay. I don't think people want that either. They want us to stand for something, stand for principles, and move forward. You know, when you poll people, polls are a funny thing. 15% of people approve of Congress, but 75% of people routinely say we should balance our budget or we should have a balanced budget amendment. 75% of the folks believe we ought to have term limits. So really, maybe their unhappiness with us is because we're not doing what we either say we're going to do or we're not doing what they want us to do. For example, by law, we're supposed to pass appropriations bills. We have like 12 different areas of the budget we appropriate for. We don't do it. We just pass what's called a continuing resolution. They lump everything together in one big, huge bill that'll be thousands of pages long that you can read about after it's passed. Nancy Pelosi says it's soon enough after it's passed to read it. And it's just all bundled together. The appropriations bills are supposed to agree with the budget. You're not supposed to have an appropriations bill that spends more that's in the budget. There is no budget. Hadn't been a budget for 2 years in the Senate. The president sent his budget over, and the Democrats were afraid of it, so they didn't even bring it up for a vote. We had to bring their budget up for a vote. So all the Republicans voted no, and all the Democrats voted no. The vote was 97-0 against the president's budget. We had 3 different budgets on our side. We had my budget, which would have balanced over 5 years. That's more applause than it got in the Senate. I think we got maybe 7 votes. We didn't get very many. But I was of the belief that we should have an alternative out there that balances. We say we're for a balanced budget. We should propose how we would do it. The budget, 47 Republicans are for a balanced budget amendment. Probably 200 in the House are for a balanced budget amendment. But how are you going to balance it? So we believed in sort of laying out how we would balance the budget. There is sort of a disconnect. Everybody in the abstract is for a balanced budget, but when it comes down to the particulars, they're not really for cutting anything. I'll give you two examples. On the FAA bill, which we finally just passed again, there's something on the bill they call the essential air services. When they call something and they name something in Washington, realize that it's the opposite of what they've named it. It's really should be called the unessential air services. It is the subsidized air travel to small airports that cannot sustain commercial airlines. For example, there's a small airport near the Great Lakes. The tickets are subsidized to the point of $4,270 per ticket. Often these airports are airports near where a congressman lives because he or she wants a direct flight to Washington. And so I call it the unessential air services. It's about 300 or 400 million. Now, a lot of times they'll argue two ways to you. One of the arguments they'll make is, they'll say, well, it's just $300 billion. You're not going to balance the budget with that. But my argument back to them is if you can't cut $300 million, how are you going to cut $1.5 trillion that we're spending each year that we don't have? The first week I was there, we introduced, or the first or second week, a bill that would cut $500 billion in spending in 1 year. And official Washington just, their eyes rolled back in their head and said, no way. And we didn't get much applause for that either. I think we got 3 or 4 co-sponsors. But when I went home or when I talked to a Tea Party group or to a liberty-minded group, they say, well, $500 billion is a good start, but that's 1/3 of 1 year's problem. Get back there and get to work. So it's really the disconnect. Washington can't imagine cutting $500 billion. And when you talk to the rest of America, the grassroots of America says it's a good start, but still not enough. That's where the disconnect is. During the House budget battle, and it's not really a budget battle, it's a battle over the continuing resolution, which is everything lumped in together, they had a free-for-all, and Boehner allowed a bunch of amendments, which was good. One of the amendments would have cut about 300 or 400 million, and it would have cut Amtrak lines that lose twice as much as they bring in. These are the worst, not just all of Amtrak, which all loses money, but just the worst of Amtrak. They lost 80 Republicans on that and couldn't pass it. When we tried to cut unessential air services, we lost 5 or 10 Republicans and couldn't get enough to get close to pass. We got no Democrats, lost 5 or 10 Republicans. This is the problem. In the abstract, they're all for a balanced budget amendment. It's easy to come back to Reno and say, I voted for the balanced budget amendment, but I didn't vote to cut any spending. It's impossible. That's the problem. And if we don't do it, though, we're approaching a nightmarish kind of scenario if we don't start doing it. Now, I go to a lot of buffets. I'm getting ready to go to lunch, and I'm sure there'll be a great feast at lunch, and I have to watch how much I'm eating because it's always food, food, food. I was in a buffet line not too long ago in Paducah, and the guy in front of me had 2 big plates of food, and he was heaping on a 3rd plate. And the guy next to him said, "You're not going to live very long eating that way." And he said, "Well, my granddad lived to be 105. And he said, "Well, I bet your granddad didn't live to be 105 eating that way." And he said, "Well, no, he lived to be 105 by minding his own business." There's a moral to the story there, and you wish your government were listening to that and minding their own business. Unfortunately, the government is in your business, not only your economic side of your business, but in your personal lives. The government is everywhere, telling you what to do at every moment of your life. It's how much water's in your toilet, what kind of light bulb you can screw in your house, what kind of shower heads you can have, how many shower heads, how much water's in your washing machine, how hot the water can get in your washing machine, how many miles per gallon your car can be. The government's in every nook and cranny of your life. And it's not that they're just taking your money through taxation. They punish you twice. The first time when they take it, the second time when they spend it to investigate you and get into every nook and cranny of your life. We have 32 federal agencies that are armed. You say, well, I don't mind if the police have guns or the FBI has guns or the Department of Defense. What about the Department of Agriculture? Why do we have SWAT teams that work for the Department of Agriculture? And I'm not kidding you. SWAT teams with automatic weapons. You may have seen the story about 2 weeks ago. The Department of Agriculture sent SWAT teams in and raided an organic food store. The crime? Selling milk directly from the cow. It's a craziness. The Department of Agriculture sends people in with automatic weapons to shut down an organic food store. They're shutting down Mennonites and Amish who are selling in the open air market in Washington, D.C. They drive in from Pennsylvania and want to sell milk from the cow, and they're shutting them down. Now, I don't think I've ever had milk direct from the cow. I'm probably going to still buy mine from the store. But a lot of homeschoolers like doing it, and a lot of people just want to be left alone, live out in the country, would like to do it. It's their damn business. What does the government have to do with this? The Department of Agriculture recently went into, it's a small town in Missouri, and they went after a couple named John and Judy Dollarite. You know what their crime was? They were selling bunnies without a license. So they got a $500 fine for not having a license to sell bunnies, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. They then fined them a total amount for every bunny they had sold. Now, you can sell a lot of bunnies because apparently they reproduce like rabbits. They fined them $90,000 for all the bunnies they had sold in the previous year or two. But this was the government. They said, we want to be your friend. You can pay by credit card on our website. But if you don't pay within 30 days, your fine will be $3.1 million. Now, I don't know how that's coming. I'm guessing the government's having trouble squeezing them out of it, squeezing the money out of them. But what will they do? Put them in jail? Would your government put you in jail for a fine like that? Yeah. Robbie Wrigley is from Pascagoula, Mississippi. She tried to develop 20 acres of land with her dad for low-income housing. And her dad's 70 and her dad's partner is 80. They were put in jail for 8 to 10 years for the crime of pollution. What were they polluting with? Dirt. They put dirt in low areas on their land, and the government said it's a wetlands, you can't put the dirt there, and they were given 8 to 10 years in jail. Now, was this just something where the sentence was handed down and they never went to jail? No, she spent 26 months in jail. She recently got out because the prosecutor was having trouble sleeping at night, the man who had prosecuted her, and he asked the judge to find a loophole to let her out after 26 months. She spent 26 months in jail. She had never been arrested, never gotten a speeding ticket. She was a Girl Scout leader with 3 small children. She was given 8 to 10 years in prison for putting dirt on her land. It's not an isolated incident. John Potsky came from Hungary in the 1950s to escape communism. He thought he was coming here to get away from communism, to get away from authoritarianism, to get away from totalitarianism. Well, he lives in Morrisville, Pennsylvania, and he lived across the street from an unsightly and illegal dump. He thought, well, I could buy that, improve the land, and maybe sell it or put a business on it. So he bought the land and proceeded to do what he thought his neighbors would like. He proceeded to clean it up. He picked up 7,000 tires off of his land. Some of the tires were in the stream. It was a very small, irregular or intermittent stream. He picked up the tires, and he picked up all the old rusted automobile parts and cars, and he improved his land. How was he rewarded? 3 years in jail. The EPA said it was a wetlands. There was no, this is not the Everglades. How do they say it's a wetlands? Well, they have something called the migratory bird rule. It says that if a bird landed in the Everglades and someday lands on your land, now you've got an interstate, interconnected wetlands with the Everglades. So you're the same as a wetlands because a bird from the wetlands from the Everglades could have landed on your property. It's insane. He was given 3 years in prison and given a $200,000 fine. He ended up declaring bankruptcy. He can no longer pay the taxes on his land. So you took a productive citizen who came here from communism and wanted to thrive and start a business in our country, and we put him in jail. We should be ashamed of ourselves.